Anxiety. It's a big word. It means lots of things to different people, and it's something we really worry about in our kids. So let's dive in and how we can help our kids with big anxieties. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hope Ninja Parents. I'm Cynthia Painter, mindset coach.
I'm Dr Louise Metcalf, a psychologist and founder of Gheorg.
Beautiful. And Gheorg is our kid-friendly robot app that helps our kids with their big emotions. If you want to know more about Gheorg, check out the details and the link in the description. Today, we're going to talk about anxiety. So we've done a previous podcast, which is around kids and big emotions and helping them, particularly with quote unquote negative or challenging emotions. But we thought we would make this one a nice specialty because, well, it is. It's such a big, juicy topic by itself. It's one we worry about, and it's more and more commonplace or mainstream for our kids as well as our own selves as adults and mental health space. So we're going to jump in. We're going to have a look at what is anxiety and ways that we can actually help our kids to not get as anxious, but also how to help our kids navigate out of those situations as well. All right. So, Louise, tell us from your perspective, give us a definition of anxiety.
Okay, so you can look this up and get the DSM version, but this is one I like to use. Anxiety is basically predicting the future, but it's all negative. So you can see how that might be a bit of an interesting mental health problem, right? It's natural for humans to predict the future, but there's a real bias in your thinking if it's all negative.
Yeah. Oh, I like that because that really speaks to what does it feel like, when you're looking forward and you're only seeing negative, but also then how you operate. The brain does not like pain. The unconscious mind likes pleasure. It doesn't like pain. That's like Danger Will Robinson stuff, right? So avoid, get out of pain. And if that's all you see, then you're going to shut down or you're going to go backwards, right? To avoid painful situations. So I love that. Love that. In Gheorg specifically, we talk about emotions being, or anxiety being, those big worries that sort of stick with us. So they're around all the time, that surroundingness, same as what you're talking about. That's what you see everywhere that you go. Now, we know also there's lots of different types of anxieties. Guys, listening to this, we are not going to go through a big diagnostic tool or list. What we'll say is you can be anxious about something specific. Maybe it's public speaking. Maybe it's going to grandma's house. Maybe it's a friend. So you have a specific anxiety about specific something, but you can also have generalized anxiety. So we're going to sit in that two space here today. We're not going to break down all the other elements here. For that, you can certainly go look those up. And if you have any questions, let us know on that. All right. So I love it. Looking into the future and all you see is negative, right? Great space. Mm-hmm. So what causes it?
Well, we think anxiety is about 50% genetic. So it's basically a kind of sensitivity to the world being, a challenging place to live, which could be quite threatening. And there's some really interesting studies in this area coming from generations from the Troubles from Northern Ireland and also from people with European Jewish descent who obviously had family members in the Holocaust. And what those studies have shown in a very, powerful manner, there's also some great, cell-based studies as well in laboratories, show that our DNA kind of goes through a bit of a methylation process so that the grandchildren, so it's not the children, but the grandchildren get a kind of hypervigilance from their grandparents' experience of life. So there's these sort of genetic sort of predetermined kind of aspects of us, and there's also this methylation part. But if you think about it, right, if you had a tendency to being hypervigilant, and you lived in a place like Northern Ireland when the Troubles were on, you would be much more likely to spot the bombs and would survive. So it's a very powerful, survival technique created by Mother Nature yet again.
We love her.
So that's the genetic part. And of course, there is a learning part as well. And, it's not just what you communicate as a parent, it's how children receive the message as well. So communication is complicated. And so the way we learn is part of that and is also complicated. So parents shouldn't feel, guilty if their kids have anxiety. They should more kind of think about it as being, well, it's a bit of a complex combination of genetics and the things that we learn, and just go from where you're at. Don't go backwards.
Yeah, absolutely. We're certainly not here to, pile guilt or anything else on top. It's good to have awareness that there's lots of things that contribute to it. I mean, and you talk about what we learn. I mean, we learn from lots of places, right? So we learn from our parents, from our siblings, maybe the messages and how they handle and cope situations, the way they talk about them, what we see on TV, what we hear about the news. So all these things with the lockdowns and the pandemics and counting numbers of deaths and cases every day and so forth, those things can certainly add to it, particularly if there's a sensitivity in there as well. And there'd be lots of other cultures that would have those sort of sensitivities that have come through based on their cultural histories. And then I think also the strategies, like that role modeling strategies of the parents or the people that are closest to it, the school, the way the school operates or their community base. Is it more an avoidance? Is it more I go out and experience? Is it an overprotective? Is it a you'll be right? All these sorts of things that we need to be wary of that can exacerbate or bring on. And of course, there's a personality element as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it can be a facilitator of avoiding things. If you have a child who's very introverted, they can, that part of their personality can facilitate developing social phobia. It doesn't mean that being an introvert doesn't necessarily mean you'll get social phobia, but if the circumstances kind of line up, it will be a facilitator. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So adding into these anxieties. So what does anxiety do to our thinking and our capacity to deal with situations? And what does anxiety do to our body?
Oh, so many big effects on the body.
Mm.
Basically, anxiety is like extremely powerful, right? It's Mother Nature's way of keeping us alive. Fear is. Anxiety is kind of like fear that sort of sticks around for a bit too long. But it has all those biological aspects of fear, fight or flight, basically. We're pumping up for something that is that we perceive anyway as life-threatening.
Yeah.
So I use everyone's used this one, I think, knows this one. Stone Age men walking around in the time of saber-toothed tigers. We actually never did that, but
No.
It's such a great image. Anyway.
It's the Flintstones. That's all thanks to the Flintstones,
We could blame them.
Like
you walking around, your saber-toothed tiger jumping out in front of you. They had massive teeth, really, really big teeth. And I imagine if humans had been around when they were around, they could have totally done some damage, right? So you see your saber-toothed tiger jump out and your body goes into overdrive. So it kicks off adrenaline and noradrenaline, and these chemicals sort of pump around your body super fast. If you've ever had those moments where you're like driving along and someone pulls out in front of you and you slam on the brakes, that's your adrenaline in action. And oh my gosh, doesn't that happen fast? You're like, it's a good day. Not even noticing such beautiful sunshine. And then, whoa, right? So that's how fast that stuff pumps around your body. And it does things like shuts down our blood through the change of blood pressure, shuts down the blood to our extremities, so that if we get slashed by the saber-toothed tiger, you know, the wound will heal. That's an effect of the interleukins that get around your body. And also the fact that you don't have that much blood pumping through that part of your body as much. It does things like it stops your digestion from happening. So that's why we tend to get stomach issues with anxiety commonly. So all these effects on the body, right? It's pumping up your heart rate, your blood pressure, all that adrenaline pumping around. Digestive system fundamentally changed for a while, you know. It's just amazing. Your lungs expand a bit. Yeah, it's what it does to the body is huge, absolutely huge. And that's why
Stressor.
anxiety is so physical.
Yeah, it's a huge stressor on the body, right? Because you're diverting everything to deal with that situation, right? And then afterwards you can recoup, hopefully, but all defenses are on in that
Nature's idea. Yeah.
Powerhouse. All right. So what does it do to our thinking in the moment and longer term? Like I might have anxiety once, what does that do? But then if it becomes a bigger part of me, what does that do to my thinking longer term?
In the brain, what's happening is that there is less blood to the cortex. And if you are an adult, of course, that includes your very well-developed frontal lobes, which make all your great decisions. So you don't make great decisions when you're anxious. So even anxious the first time, you are not making great decisions in that moment. You make very, sort of broad decisions, which would kind of work to keep you alive, I'm jumping that fence. I see a snake, I'm jumping that fence, right?
Regardless on what's the other side of the fence, I'm jumping it. Yes.
That's right. You're not thinking about whether there's more snakes on the other side or there's a hole there. You just, I'm just getting out of the way, right?
Yes.
So you can see how simple your thinking is under the influence of fear, terror in that moment. And if it continues, then you can see how that would be quite problematic for you. Your thinking just can't be as complex, and we don't tend to put things into memory very well. It's interesting when you think about exams, right? Like we're not good at putting things into memory when we are anxious, and not good at recalling things from memory when we are anxious. So exams are an interesting problem area for kids, particularly who get anxiety. So yes, it has quite big effects actually on the brain and how we think. And once you get used to a pattern of anxiety, right? Maybe you've learnt that this particular place has this particular threat in it, and it might not be a snake. It could be, it could be things like people laughing at you, right? Which can be quite threatening even to young kids. Yeah. Then that becomes a prediction. So I'm walking to this place, it's going to be horrible because people are going to laugh at me. So again, but it's all negative.
Yeah. And from a mindset perspective as well, or in the NLP type world, it really begins to create belief systems within us. It creates potentially limiting beliefs or identities within us, that I am this type of person, or I can't, those definitive things, or it always or never. You begin to, there's a concept of the ladder of inference. And the ladder of inference is where we have a ladder made up of the two long elements and the rungs, right? You can see I'm a very technical ladder person, but you take, when something happens and you get this belief and you're like, that means this, and you take a rung and you put it on that ladder, right? And then you're going to go, oh, but when that happens, I always do this. And you just collect rungs and you make this strong belief system or identity or inference. You infer things that this is the way it is. And it's a story that you're telling yourself. And therefore, that will keep you in that state as well. And it does things to your body around how it's sensory, creates blockages in the neurosystem. There's lots of things that it does. So no saber-tooth tigers. We need to do something about this. we need to help out, right? Because we don't have saber-tooth tigers. We do have other things. Now it's very real. Please make everyone understand that, you know, it is very real and so forth. We are here to help, right? So what is it that, okay, well, let's answer this question first. If we're talking here to parents, particularly parents, guardians, grandparents, and so forth, all us, right? All us, all our Hope Ninja parents out there, come with us, right? How can you, we're not here to diagnose, but what could you notice that might get you a little worried? I'm not saying take them to the psych couch, but that they're in an anxious moment even, or that the kids are maybe sitting in an anxious place often. What would we notice? What would we see?
Yeah, so firstly, a little bit of anxiety is normal, right? Like it's normal to be anxious about things. When I got my first vaccination needle, not a big needle fan, you know, I was nervous about that. You know, it turned out to be, you know, I had a bit of a sleepless night the night before. Yes, I know it is wimpy, but I didn't realize that it would not hurt that much. So when I turned up with a needle, you know, I was like, oh my God, but then it didn't hurt much at all. And I was like, awesome, I've learnt that now. I know now that this needle, which I have to get again and maybe even a third time, is not that bad. It's like a mosquito bite, basically. But one of the things I did do is, because I am nervous about needles, I made sure I role modeled very bravely the opposite to my kid. So I said very honestly that I did not know what this needle would feel like, but most needles feel, which is true, have very little sensation. So they're very easy to get. They don't hurt very much at all. So I think this needle will be the same. And off I went, you know, with my, you know, sense of this is going to be all right. You know, yes, had a bit of a panic once I got to the actual doctor's office. But thankfully, you know, my kid didn't see that part. So now if he needs to get a needle, which hasn't been proved yet, but if he does, then he'll be saying those things to himself. Oh, most needles don't hurt that much. It's only going to be really short. You know, it'll be fine. So that's sort of the way you can talk to yourself, even if you are quite terrified, can have quite a big impact on how kids feel about their own challenging experiences as well.
Okay, great. So it's absolutely normal and it's good for us to role model. What are we going to notice in our kids that would make us think that they're probably being more anxious than the occasional appropriate moment? Like, what are we noticing within them that is going to alert us to, okay, we need to support them a little bit? Like I said, we're not taking them off to the psych couch, we're not diagnosing, but we're just saying, you know, they seem to get worked up about stuff.
Yeah, so that's the normal part, right? It's normal to have a little bit of anxiety about stuff. Okay, so you know when it's not normal, when it starts to disrupt. And that's true for adults as well. When it starts to disrupt your life, that's the time to think, okay, this might, first of all, of course, as a parent, you're thinking, this might be a thing, you know, and then you're seeking help, right? That's the usual process that, you know, most parents kind of go through. And the things that really kind of stick out are things like, well, stomach problems in relation to things that kids might be trying to avoid. It's the rising kind of incidence of school avoidance, you know, pre-pandemic. Yeah. Not sure what's going to happen post-pandemic, but it could be the same, right? I mean, schools. So, and like that avoidance problem can, blow up a bit, basically that this is, there's no good stuff at school. And you can see how black and white that thinking is and how it's predicting the future, but it's all negative. So unlikely to be correct or realistic. So that's when you're starting to see things that they're problematic because they literally disrupt the kid's life. They can't go to school, or maybe, they want to see their friends, or they don't want to do a particular sport anymore. And it could be even things like they don't want to ever eat a certain food again. Or they fear that if they eat too much of a particular food, they might vomit, or in certain situations, they might vomit, that if you're vomiting, you can kind of go on for a bit for those things.
And I imagine language as well. So if we go from the place that anxiety is predicting the future and seeing only negative, if they are talking that way, it's like, oh, well, this will never happen. I can't, I never win anything, it's going to be bad. So the way that our language is and our behavior is communication, right? So I imagine if they're talking in that context as well.
Yeah. It's great if kids are able to kind of verbalize like that. So if you are getting signals like that, like about a particular thing, school is obviously the most common, where it's like, it's always bad, it's never good. I'm always afraid there, or bad stuff always happens there. That's definitely a really good indicator that you may be starting to get thinking problems, or they might be, further advanced.
Yeah, beautiful. And I guess we've got to take everything with a grain of salt as parents. So sometimes it's just that they want to stay home with you, or they just want to watch, YouTube all day or whatever. So it's all a grain of salt. But these are little bits and pieces that you can pull up. Certainly in my child, stomach was definitely, he's always been a stomach feelings kid anyway, and definitely feels it in his stomach. And we had avoidance of school. We had, and all the language and the tears and, all those sorts of things. And he just doesn't deal with change really well. So, working through that with him as well. So, all right. So how do we then help? Because we can have a tendency to either go, oh, my poor darling, and we go in there and we lay with them and the world is terrible. Or we go, oh, it's not that bad. Put your socks, you'll be fine. Let's go. Right? What are you talking about? It's school. You love school, right? And we dismiss it because we're just getting on with it, right? What are you talking about? Tough it up. All that lovely messaging that comes.
Oh, yeah.
What do we do? What do we do in those instances, or in the longer things that seem to be hanging around a bit more?
First of all, you should always believe them. So,
can we say that again?
Always believe them.
Always believe them.
When the kids sometimes go, I'm scared about something at school because they want to stay home with you. That does happen. But, mostly kids are trying to communicate something to you. So it's important to just sit down with them and just receive the message.
Can I just say on that, the number of times I've, in reflection, realized that my kids were actually just telling me and I just didn't pick it up. And I'm like, oh, you actually, yeah, you meant it when you said that thing, right? So, yes, believe them.
Right? You should, as a parent, you should just kind of keep a mental checklist, really, just to kind of keep track of how many times your child says this particular thing, right? Because if kids are trying to stay home with you, they'll tend to use several kinds of strategies to try and figure out the one that will work. Whereas kids who are generally experiencing an anxiety about, say, being laughed at school, that's what they'll say that much more often. So you've got to sort of keep a little mental checklist in your head and kind of, track really what your kid is saying. Try and keep the sense of or try and build the sense of how big it is, how common it is, and how consistent it is. So that's one thing, always believe them, keep the mental checklist. And the other thing you want to do, and this is really challenging for a parent, because as you said, we want to go, oh, my darling, right? Or just get on. The really challenging part is you have to help them navigate the thing they are afraid of.
Yeah.
So if they are afraid of snakes, right, that's a genuine fear, I'm telling you now. And I'm genuinely afraid of snakes.
I've heard you consistent. I'm taking a mental check of how many times you've said snakes. Okay.
Thank you. I saw one recently. So that's a genuine fear. It's very helpful, but you still want to talk to them about it. Like, you know, yes, snakes are a bit scary. Some of them are really poisonous. Maybe you might show them the ones that are versus the ones that aren't. You know, educate versus kind of like, yeah, snakes bad. All right. But something like school avoidance, right? That's a real challenge, because avoiding something is the thing you want to help them to not do.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, teaching them about what it looks like when you want to avoid something, i.e. a needle, what it's like to be brave in those circumstances, how you talk to yourself, and teaching them those strategies really helps a lot. And if you want sort of more information about that, sort of how you talk to them, there's heaps of programs online as well as obviously George does some of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. From an NLP perspective, there's quite a few techniques that you can use, particularly sensory. So the way that we use what they call submodalities, which is our visual, our kinesthetic, our auditory, our different senses, and being able to play around with that. Because when we get into a really heightened emotion like anxiety, then we'll notice that with our emotions, or what we see or what we hear, becomes really close up to us, right? And we feel it big in front of us, right? Narrow, right? It's all in. And so there's actually techniques that you can learn, whereas that you notice where it is and you make it smaller, you push it away from yourself, you might blow it away from yourself, make it smaller and darker rather than big up in your face. Because when something's big in your face and it's all encompassing, you can't see anything else, right? So being able to help kids breathe it out, move the feeling away is a really great technique to be able to do. And also as parents, practicing reframing. So you talked about the talk in our head, that's our unconscious mind. In NLP, we say unconscious versus subconscious, but it's the unconscious mind, that little part of our brain that is the emotional powerhouse, and it's trying to keep us safe, right? So it's then reframing it as in putting it into a different context or switching it around. So, you know, instead of being, oh my God, that great big snake's going to come and bite me, it's like, oh, look at that snake that's over there, and it's, you know, it's safely over in the grass over there, and we're going to keep calm, right, as that is over there. Or rather than something like, I always fail, or they always laugh at me, and it would be like, always? Most of the time they laughed at me. Most of the time. This is reframing, checking in, right, using questions. Or even, are they laughing at you, or are they laughing at something else? So again, we've got language that's just bringing it closer in and rebuilding the wall right up in our face. So by practicing some language without dismissing their feeling.
Yeah, very important.
And that's an important thing. I can see you're really scared. That sounds really crappy. Acknowledge. We talked about this in our episode, Kids and Big Emotions. We want to acknowledge that emotion. We want to reset ourselves, acknowledge our emotion, and then talk through it. And it's the talk through it element where you can then go into reframing rather than trying to do it when they're in a heightened state. We want to believe our kids and help them, right? Acknowledge that emotion. Oh, beautiful.
Let me educate you about the snake as soon as I see it. Sorry, not listening. Jumping over the fence. Jumping over the fence.
Jumping over the fence, right? Even if it's meters away. So we can do things that be able to disassociate that with some modalities and make it look really, really small rather than here. Very important. We're going to have to work on this one, Louise, I think. I want to link this to hope. We did do episode 1. If you've missed it, what are you doing? Go back. Go to episode 1 after you finish this one. Listen to episode 1. We are all about what hope is and what the hell it's got to do with parenting. Go back. Do that. All right. But can you give us a little snippet on like a sentence or two on what hope is? And then let's link it here to anxiety because I think it's important.
Hope is the ability to predict the future, but it has good stuff in it, basically. And you can see from my description of anxiety that it's not happening there. So being able to navigate that territory to get to a point where you're able to kind of go, okay, like there's an element of my thinking, which is, yeah, I'm predicting the future, but it's all bad. But I also have the ability to go, hang on a sec, the chances of everything being bad in this moment probably aren't that great. So I'm going to balance my thinking. I'm going to get a little more accurate here. And I'm going to predict some good stuff about this future, right? And you get better at it as you develop those cortical structures behind the prefrontal cortex that we talked about in the first episode, just by practicing that particular skill. Basically, the skill.
Yeah, absolutely. And so a really nice lineup with anxiety predicting the future and seeing negative, with hope is predicting the future and seeing positive possibilities and opportunities and ways to navigate through. So again, we come back to reframing, or how do we role model all these techniques to be able to something that's possible. So if we throw in some of the hope techniques that we talked about in many of our episodes, but particularly episode 1, hear about if they're having a concern about or an anxiety about going to school, for example. We're going to leave the snake alone for now. We'll talk about going to school, right? Then we can also, in those moments, but in normal everyday, we talk about don't try to teach someone to swim when they're drowning. So in calm times, we can have conversations about what are you looking forward to at school? What did you enjoy from school? What was great about school? What was the most fun today? Or what do you think might happen today, right? So things where we're getting them more and more used to looking at positives. Another technique I like to do with kids and clients, it's a version of high five, which is at the end of the day or a couple of days a week, where we talk about what was our 5 things we're most grateful for, or things that we that went well. So again, it's training the brain that not everything is negative.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
And whether that was a smile and a sunshine and a butterfly and a hug, whatever those high 5 things are, training the brain, building up those neural connectors that you actually do have things that go well.
Yeah, absolutely. Great techniques, right? Some people have a reaction to the gratitude thing, right? Come up with things you are grateful for very different reasons, right? But the thing about those gratitude exercises is that they're actually a memory exercise. So if you do have a reaction to the notion of, I'm thankful for, I'm grateful for, that you could have a totally legitimate reason for that. No judgment at all. That the best thing is to think about it as a memory exercise, and to instead think, I'm going to remember 3 things that went well today. So you can substitute. Yeah, you can get rid of the word gratitude if you do feel like you do have some kind of reaction to it. It's reasonably common.
And with my kids, we actually use the term we don't use the term gratitude as a general rule. We use the term, what did I enjoy most today? What was my great things that happened today? What was 5 fun things or 5 things I'm happy about? So you can label it in any way you like, whichever works for you, because not everyone even can, whether you have an issue with gratitude or not, can even think of it in terms of gratitude. But what we want to do is actually practice the muscle memory to help us go forward, right? To see the hopeful and opportunities, because that will actually make us way more resilient. So we talk about hope being able to help us ride the waves of life, make us more resilient to be able to deal with stuff that happens.
Yeah, and I'm forgetting which podcast it was, but we did talk about the importance of, how this process is not about being, uncritical. People think that hope is, hope does a bit of a bad name. It's a bit sort of, it's a bit sort of not cool. It's not cool to be hopeful, but but that's because it's often associated with naivety, and that's not the kind of hope we're talking about. We're actually trying to create really accurate thinking. If you think about it, you can't be right about the future if it's all negative. And on the flip side, you're not going to be right about the future if it's all positive. So this sort of more accurate thinking is a balanced kind of thinking. And that's what hope is. Hope is you're thinking about the future, it has some positive in it, and it's this really grounded kind of, positivity. So otherwise it's too brittle. So you want that kind of thinking, to really create.
And it reminds me as well, as we sort of begin to wrap up as well, is that it really is about honing in on the RAS, or the reticular activating system. So the part of us that wants a red bike, and we see red bikes everywhere, right? So we're playing with that, because if we are anxious or in that anxious state, our brain wants us to be right. So it's going to find things that reinforce that, right? I'm worried about them laughing at me. All of a sudden I see everybody laughing at me, right? Whereas if we've trained our brain to look for, other things, that things go well, then we are going to be able to see more of those things go well.
Yeah. And you can see the resilience that comes from that, right? You're not just bouncing back from the negative stuff in life. You're actually growing from, the positive feedback that you're basically getting from the world.
Yes. And this is what we want to achieve with Hope Ninja Parents. Beautiful.
Parents driving the change. We are so powerful. Parents are so powerful.
Parents are. Absolutely. Literally changing the world. So hopefully, parents, you are on board with us. We've got some tips there to help with anxiety, but they're actually helping us build hope, which builds resilience, confidence, resourcefulness, critical thinking. Check out episode 1 if you haven't done that already. Go revisit it. It was good. All right. So lots of great things for you here in this particular episode on anxiety. Thank you so much for that. And remember, if you're wanting help with your kids' big emotions, and then anxiety may be part of that, look at Gheorg. So the Gheorg is the kid-friendly robot app. The details are in the description as well. You can go check him out. It's a very easy and practical check-in that your kids can use as a resource. If you have any questions, we'd love your questions. If there's something you want us to talk about, something that you're particularly challenged with as a parent, and we've got some great episodes coming up. I'm really excited about some of the topics coming up. But if there's something you'd like us to talk about, let us know in the comments, or you can email us as well. We'll put the details in. And of course, you can just come and tell us how fabulous this is and that you're on the Hope Ninja Parents boat. I hope you are. You're on a mission with us. All right, well, we will wrap it up from here. Thank you very much, Dr. Louise, and everyone else. We look forward to seeing you next time. Bye, everyone.